In the wake of 9/11, which is really hard for me to believe happened 21 years ago, I was like so many people who were searching for answers. Who were these people who would hijack and fly airplanes into buildings and kill so many innocent people? What were their motivations and what were they trying to prove? And how could a nation like ours, with a very sophisticated national security apparatus, fail to stop them? 5 years later, an investigative journalist for the New Yorker magazine named Lawrence Wright wrote an outstanding book that was later made into a film. It was called The Looming Tower. For my money, it's still the best account of the background, the long history of the people and the events that led up to the terrorist attacks on 9/11. It offers a superb background, a description of the reasons why a small extremist fringe movement within Islam, whose members lived in Sudan and Saudi Arabia and later in Afghanistan, built a network of secret cells. They were religious zealots who followed the warped teachings of clerics who believed their vision of society and human relationships was the only valid way of being in the world. Western society was the enemy. Even worse, their vision was what we call apocalyptic, meaning that once human society was in line with their ideals, God would usher in a new world, a paradise on earth. Their faith was ostensibly Islam, but what they taught bore very little resemblance to what the vast majority of Muslims believe and practice. So, very sadly indeed, for anyone unfamiliar with Islam, the terrible actions of those few might have come to represent mainstream Muslim belief. It does not. So, who did these few apocalyptic thinkers recruit to their cause? Well, the converts of these extremists were specifically found among people who were impoverished and who felt left behind and forgotten and marginalized, people who were especially vulnerable to a kind of cult worldview. In that echo chamber, people were indoctrinated to never trust anyone outside the group, to not believe mainstream media because it was fake news, to view any government or anyone who disagreed with them as a mortal enemy. Lawrence Wright shows how, step by step, year by year, this group grew and committed ever larger acts of terror that culminated in 9/11, all in the service of an apocalyptic vision of ushering in a new world where God would set things right, according to them. It's important to recognize that apocalyptic thinking is not exclusive to Islam. It can be found in any faith tradition where some people feel they are under pressure, being unjustly persecuted, and where the values they hold dear are being stripped away. It certainly crops up in the Bible. The book of Revelation is the most famous example. It's an apocalyptic fever dream. Some call it a prophecy of things to come, even though it's understood today by legitimate Bible scholars as the writings of a rather imaginative Christian during a time in the late first century when his particular community was facing severe persecution by the Roman Empire. So, for any of us to read Revelation as a sneak preview of literal things to come would be a lot like watching a science fiction movie about an alien invasion and believing that was actually going to happen as soon as we stepped out of the movie theater. Like any literature, Revelation is full of analogies relating to the moment in time and the world events that were happening when it was written. It's not about a time in the future. It's ultimately about the hope that God will set things right in the present. In other words, it's apocalyptic. When we use the word apocalypse today, it's usually understood as something kind of scary. And in fact, whoever is having dreams of an apocalypse may envision really bad things happening to the people they see as their enemies, and they may feel compelled to commit those bad things themselves before the paradise they hope for can come true. But there's a different kind of apocalyptic vision we can find in the Gospels and in the life of Jesus. In Matthew's Gospel, God is acting through Jesus to transform the world in a positive way. The kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven, depending on the gospel you read, is a way of being in the world where justice reigns, where people are valued no matter who they are or the road they've traveled through life. It's a way of being in relation to each other that is grounded in justice. It's a way of being where we love and accept and embrace others without preconditions and without barriers, where you truly love your neighbor as yourself. It's a way of accepting forgiveness and being forgiven, of sharing and not hoarding, of plenty and not scarcity, and of peace. So it does not involve doing away with your enemies in the way we usually think of that, but in loving your enemies so persistently until they're no longer enemies, but friends. So that apocalyptic vision does not involve violence or the destruction of others, but it's no less revolutionary. It turns upside down the preconceived notions of how the real world operates. And it happens not in the future at some super secret hour that only God knows, and it doesn't happen in some end time scenario where there's a battle between forces of good and evil. The positive apocalyptic vision of Jesus happens any place and any time. And to describe that in the 24th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus gives a few examples of how we might be going about our business, not expecting anything extraordinary to happen, when the kingdom of God suddenly appears and we find ourselves experiencing it. He reminds us of the story of Noah, the great flood, where those people who represented, allegorically, everything that was warped and misguided about human life, those people were swept away. It wasn't so much about the people who vanished, but what they represented was no more. Greed, corruption, selfishness were just gone. Because in God's kingdom, those ways of being in the world go right out the window. Jesus tells about other people mysteriously vanishing too. People working in a field, people working grinding meal. Just like those in the example of Noah, we can only assume those disappearing folks were symbols of dysfunction in everyday life and relationships. But in the kingdom of God way of being in the world, dysfunctional relationships do not exist. He tells them about a homeowner who doesn't have a clue about when and where a thief might come in the night. So the only thing for the homeowner to do is to keep alert, to stay awake. A thief in the night sounds a little scary, but the point is not that there's a thief. The point is not knowing when or where the kingdom comes true, which is Jesus' way of saying, now if you're looking for a specific time in the future when the kingdom of God might drop by for a visit, if you think you can put it on your calendar like an appointment, if you think you can time manage it, you're very much mistaken. The kingdom of God comes at any time and at any place. Our only job is to be alert to it, to welcome it, and to live into it. Now, if all this apocalyptic talk about the kingdom of God appearing at any time and any place sounds a bit weird and esoteric and otherworldly, I get that. It can conjure up images of windstorms and big dramatic earth-shaking events, like we're being asked to be alert to suddenly becoming cast members in a Hollywood disaster movie. I'm pretty certain the kingdom of God that Jesus envisioned was apocalyptic, but it looked nothing like that. I am convinced the kingdom of God comes at any time and any place when we least expect it, precisely when we're going about our normal business doing the 21st century equivalent of working in the fields or grinding meal. I believe it comes into our field of vision and we can participate in it when we're simply alert, awake, and attuned to it, when we wake up each day expecting something wonderful to happen, when our hearts are open to it, when we witness any kind of act of kindness and mercy and grace, when we know, let's say, that a friend who's been wronged chooses not to retaliate but to forgive, when you have wronged someone and they offer the hand of friendship anyway, because life's too short to hold on to hurt like it's some kind of trophy. When a teacher who works with autistic children has a chance encounter with one of her former students years later, and that student looks at her and silently holds his hands together in the shape of a loving heart, in gratitude for the difference she made in his life. When a parent and a child who've been estranged from each other understand that their history together may have been filled with pain, but the only thing to ease their pain is to give in to the love that can wash it away. Those are real apocalyptic moments, kingdom of God moments, not destructive or cataclysmic or scary, but positive and healing, affirming and life-changing. And as we enter today into the beautiful season of Advent, these weeks leading up to Christmas are all about keeping alert to those moments, to prepare us for the moment when the love of God arrives again in our lives, every day, with wonder and laughter and absolute joy.